there was no way I wanted my daughter to go through. I was afraid she'd be illiterate and highly intelligent with no reason to be illiterate. She was, gosh, like 6, 7, 8, 9. And through those years, I would do the exercises with her because how else are you going to get a kid to sit down and do these like finger movements, or you look at a paper on the wall and you walk in a circle around two bar stools. It doesn't seem fun. It's really boring. But what happened within a year, she developed peripheral vision. So you reignite your peripheral vision and harmonize it first, and then you start with your central vision later. And now she can walk downstairs. She has no problem riding a bike down a hill.
Has your life, your dreams been interrupted? Good news. It is possible to reinvent our lives. People are doing it every day, and some are brave enough to share the struggles, disappointments, and challenges. If you are looking for a new beginning, a do-over, or to rediscover your passion, maybe even find a new one, then grab a cup of coffee and let's talk. Interrupted, Act 2, Reinventing Your Legacy, with your host, Coach Laurie.
Corey Ihler is the new owner of the Millcreek View. He's also a realtor, he's a broker and investor, and now he's dabbling in, what did you say, investment?
Oh, I do life insurance with my brother.
I met Corey at a luncheon. It was a working luncheon. He and the former owner were kind of doing a handoff there for the marketers for us to meet Corey. So Corey, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. What a great event. It was nice to get to know so many people so quickly. You don't get that opportunity very often.
Sometimes I have a stigma about networking groups because in the past, way back in the past, it was kind of like you'd leave with 100 cards, but nobody even asked really your name. But this is a different type of networking, and I just love it. And it's really made some amazing connections. And I know that you have a lot of connections through that group, like Marcel
All
and
right. I met a lot, and I think any group where you get the chance for everyone to introduce themselves, super helpful. It helps the connection process move a
definitely.
little faster.
You're the new owner of the Mill Creek View. What does that mean? What do
Right.
you do?
So I say it's an ownership role. I believe that community newspapers, Mill Creek is a smaller community city in Washington State. The community paper was started about 40 years ago by a man named Frank, and he ran it for a long time. And then when he passed away, it was handed off to another person, and it went more partisan politics. The community didn't really like that. It's still like an old time paper that's delivered door to door by kids, and so the kids were getting chased off the doorstep. And then Nicole took it over and made it more nonpartisan, middle of the road, and started rebuilding it. And then we had a discussion. I called her and Anna, her partner at the time, interviewed them honestly because I was curious as to there was a lot of censorship at that time with major platforms and all forms of mass communication. Here they were making papers and being their own publishers and helping people speak. And so I interviewed them, and we had a long discussion, and it trailed into everything to talking about the culture and talking about the advantage of the organized printed word and personalities, and moved into a little discussion about neoliberalism and how that's liquidating some of our cultural and community capital. And when it came to talking about the paper, I said that's a form, especially a local paper, is a form of community capital. Communities are about holding people together. And we had a discussion, and a year or two later, Nicole reached out and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling this. Is this a role that you would be interested in?" And I was like, well, given some of my stated principles, I think so. And so we had that process, and now I made the purchase. We're in the handoff, and everybody's wondering, well, what does that mean for a small community? Well, my honest opinion is it doesn't mean a whole lot. I'm an ownership role. So that's a role when you're talking about something that is community capital, which is community is a shared environment. And so if something is community capital, then I don't really see it as mine. It's not mine to try and exploit for every possible reason I can, because that'll destroy any community, especially partisan politics. So it's going to stay kind of like it is, focusing on the community, the local people. There are some local contributors, and they're pretty mainstream, and they're going to stay that way. And we don't need kids getting chased off the doorstep anymore. And we plan on growing distribution and being a resource. As it's been pointed out, the community papers really help. There are national and international city rankings, and anytime you have a community paper, the ranking of the city goes up. The community just has more value in general. And so, as me and Nicole had talked about, forms of community capital are important because people move and pay more to go places where there's more community capital, where there's more cultural capital, where there's a better environment. In people's operational activities, they prove that things have value. It's just we're in a current like neoliberal economy that doesn't always calculate for that. And everything's about commerce a lot of times. Or I was listening to a podcaster recently, and he said everything's monetizable. Everything's monetizable. Never forget that. Yeah, the monetary system, commerce is super important. You don't liquidate all the relationships for the sake of commerce. That's the first way to destroy a community.
You talk about the three spheres of community. It's the three spheres is community, culture, and commerce, right?
Right, right. Those are uh, three spheres that interact together. The Western tradition typically has been those spheres work together and they interact, and that there's boundaries, strong cultural and community boundaries for things that don't get commercialized. And when you have, I didn't know what neoliberalism was. Well, I had a neoliberal financial education at the University of Seattle, SU. I didn't really get it until I got older that financializing everything possible is not actually a great idea. Increasing the GDP at any possible direction does not actually lead to good lives. A hurricane, everybody knows, and floods increase the GDP because you got to rebuild everything. But nobody would say that that's a good outcome. There used to be more commercial boundaries to commerce, and that led to stronger forms of capital and socially. That's kind of my why I take the Millcreek View paper as an ownership role, because my as a steward, really, it's just to try and do whatever I can to protect it, keep it running, keep it doing what it does. And it's an improvement in everybody's lives in the area, and it'd be a shame for that not to be happening. It'd be a real loss in value.
The thing I've been thinking about since I met you at the luncheon was that you were a real estate broker, but then all of a sudden now you're the owner of a newspaper, and
Right.
you've kind of talked about it because the community and that. So, what was the shift that you're like, you know what, I got to do this too?
Well, because I've spent so many years stating that I feel that those things are important. I'm not blind, even with all this talk about commerce, being a real estate agent, which is more of a service industry job and more community facing. There's some harmony there. That's important, but not to create discord for political or ideological reasons, or purely commercialize something. So I understand that even from a real estate business perspective, conversations, real estate comes down to conversations. Are you having more real estate conversations than other people? Then you're going to be more successful than most people. Now, so I have an ad in there, and I do things, but it's also part of what I need to do if we're gonna have a community paper long term. And so I've been advised by many people every time I jokingly say, "Hey, I bought a paper." Firstly, they don't understand what I mean. And then secondly, when I show them, no, like I'm responsible for this paper now, they say, "Don't you know that's papers are going away?" So they always laugh at me and say it's not a really great idea because there are certainly, if there's real estate, there's much faster ways to do real estate. But I had conflicting opinions. I feel that we are losing forms of community and cultural capital, and this is one that's been around for a while. And so I wanted to stay consistent, basically, and and so I've taken on that role, and that's my responsibility now. And Nicole's been great in handing it off and introducing me and showing me the process. And, we have a lot of people who contribute. And that's why I say, again, it's an ownership role. We have somebody who's been around since the paper started who does distribution. We have contributors that get us all the information with the city and have those relationships. And so I kind of came in as an owner, and everything 70-80% of it is run by other people, and that's what they do. And my job as an owner is just to make sure now that the paper continues to serve the general population, and I would like to improve it so it could increase distribution so that more people in the city get the newspaper. We're at 6,000 in distribution. We're going up to 8,000 this month. There were times when the distribution before I knew about the paper was much larger. That's what we want to do. Is community is like I see it as a form of glue, holds people together. The role of a community paper is to do that. It's to hold people together, inform people, and to harmonize the community.
You mentioned when you tell people you bought a paper, they're like, "Hey, it's going away." So what's similar is I work in radio, and that's what
Yeah,
I always hear. People will ask what I do. I say I work at Cairo, and they'll go, "Oh, I don't listen to the radio." And so I really connect with you on that because I believe what is going to keep our communities together is that live and local, whether it's the newspaper
right.
or the radio station. That when COVID hit, I always said, because I was a traffic reporter, I always said, job security. Like, when are we not going to have traffic? Guess what?
Right.
We did not have traffic. And what happened is we went back to old school radio, and I would just report on any local store or business what they were doing now, if they were serving people, if you could pick stuff up on the roadside. It shifted, and that is really, to me, the value. This is the biggest value of these forms of communication is the live local stories, the community, and they feel that they're part of it. And that's what, like you said, the glue. Whether people think it's going away or not, it is still what people turn to in
Right.
crisis.
And you were talking about getting back to local stories now that there's more time for that. That's also a form that highly increases community trust, peer-to-peer trust. And we're in a time when trust is one of those forms of community assets that I see as a form of capital. And when trust goes down, it does affect the economy, but most of all, it affects our living standards. If you don't trust your community, you don't let your children go out. If your children don't go out and they're forced to stay indoors and play video games, they don't get the experiences they need to enter the enter the adult world.
So you said when you went to college, you kind of learned about things, but it wasn't until you were older. What was the shift that kind of brought you to realize that it's more than like money and real estate, but oh, what really matters is community? Was there a shift that brought you to that? Or is it just when we get old, that's what
Uh,
we do? Not that you're old.
well, right, but part of it is actually just from a tribal sense or human sense is that yeah, as you get older, your focus is more on prolonging legacy and prolonging you're invested into the system, where when you're younger you're much more like a libertarian who just needs to work or find where you're going to settle. You got to earn wherever you're going to be, and you're concerned about other things when you're in your early 20s and late teens. I would say a big portion of it too is I eventually started realizing I always thought of myself as a capitalist, and I learned that in finance and through political information, and I got older and older and older, and I started to realize, oh, really by definition, I'm not a capitalist, I'm a poser. You have to have access to capital to be a capitalist. Capitalists use capital and monetary capital. When I started to realize that, because life hits you over the head sometimes, it happened a few times, and I just realized, oh, well, I understand capitalism, but I'm not a capitalist because I don't use capital to run everything in my life. I have to build capital, and I just kept searching and searching, and I started learning that there are other forms of capital like cultural capital and community-based capital, and these things are came before the commercial systems. So I started just kind of exploring that as a concept. And I think that culture and community also has a gender aspect to it. I think it comes out if you look at how tribes used to operate. It elicits that there is like a feminine, more feminine spaces and more masculine spaces, and those are common areas for people. Also, being in America, where there's a lot of preaching on the right side of the aisle for individualism, or sometimes I think radical individualism, and this idea of being extremely a radical individualist. Well, that means that there's no common property. A lot of my friends were in those camps, and they started saying, well, how do these things function if we're all just individual widgets? And how do you have common elements? And then it just came apparent over time that there was other things that were important and need to be protected, and that maybe this commercial system that liquidates, it's kind of like having a balance sheet that has assets and liabilities and cash, and you're liquidating some of these really important assets so that you can have more cash on hand. And it feels good because you have more cash to spend as a general economy. You're selling off some of your best assets. So let's say you have like great construction equipment and tracos and backhoes and sophisticated stuff, and you're selling that off, and you're spending a lot, you're having a great time, but you're replacing that equipment with lower and lower forms of equipment. And so it feels great. Everyone's getting paid. The GDP is going up. Your income's coming through. Cash is moving. But at the end of the day, your cultural capital is less and your living standards are lower.
You know, I raised my kids as a single mom in a small community. There was nothing more valuable to me to know that people knew who I was and who my kids were.
Right.
They knew. I remember one time I had to go to two different outdoor ball games, and a big storm blew through, and everybody had to leave. Well, I had left one kid, the older kid, at one field and had driven to the other field. And just knowing in a community where we have that connection and caring, it was
Right.
before cell phones, and I got home, and here's my daughter. She's home because she had friends and community that said, "Hey, we got to get her home." And I
Right.
think that's when you talk about the individualism. And then when I moved over to the city, it was a little different. It took me a little longer to connect because wasn't raised here. But what I love about Mill Creek, especially, and I see all the things Marcel's doing. Y'all had this big event this summer. It really feels like community. It really feels like caring.
Right.
The invitation felt like, hey, even if you live in outside our city, come visit, hang out with us. And really, and like you keep saying, as I get older, you've still got dark hair, I got gray hair.
Right.
But
Right.
as we get older, that sense of community, and for me as a single mom, was so valuable. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I even, chose not to go work corporate because I'd have to ride a ferry and be gone all day. So I did what I could to survive in this community because it was safe and good for my kids.
So you bring up a great topic. I also was a single parent, and when my daughter was young, I lived with family, and that was essential. And being a man, there was I'm not part of the mom group. There's a lot of I would pay attention, and I would see how all the single moms have so much more communication. I would watch single moms meet a single mom and they're friends for 3 years. And as a single dad, you meet another male and they're like you need to go out and earn more. And I'm like, well, I'm also going to be there for my daughter. And so some of your more productive years as a male end up not being commercially productive, which is essential to raise your children. Being a man, as I told you, that's community is more of a feminine space, and the corporate or work or commercial space is more of a masculine space where there's a lot of competition. When you have a toddler, you don't bring that toddler into a highly competitive spaces, and you need to be there for that toddler. Now, with neoliberalism, there's a huge push that you need to go out and work, and your child needs to be raised most of the time in a commercial system, which would be daycare. And I'm fairly intelligent, and I'm a generalized thinker, so I bring in a lot of information from different sources. And I was like, and I felt like, well, being a single parent, she's not going to have the connection that, and I know that that's one of the leading ways for a kid to be abused, if we're honest, is to have them watched by strangers for money. Just like I think it applies to homelessness as well. When you are just hiring people commercially to solve culturally or community problems, you're basically hiring a mercenary. You're now that person may be a great person and may care, but you are putting commerce first as the solution. I believe that homelessness right now is a cultural and community problem. You can't solve cultural issues and community issues with neoliberalism. And that's unfortunately this is my ideological position, right? And it's not really left or right that I know of, but it's that commerce won't solve those problems because commerce is about increasing the GDP. It's about having employees.
Yeah, but that's that when we talk about interrupted, that's an interruption. When I became a single parent and I didn't have a lot of support. Now I did have family, but I lived on an island, a small community.
Right,
You're doing it by yourself and you have to think of all that aspect. And as a woman, I'm thinking one way, as a man, you're thinking another, and I have different pressure than you have because they're like, go make more money, that's what's most important. And you're like, but I got this kid, I want to know, because by the time I make all this money, she's going to be graduating.
right.
So
And
again, it goes right to that core value that you originally talked about community and connection. I love that.
absolutely. And I definitely recognized early if I wasn't around a lot, then there wouldn't be the trust later in life to be listened to. And so, and I also recognize that we didn't have the strongest form of culture either. I'm not a, I, I was kind of failed by the school system, and recognized that my daughter had some of the same issues, and she has some of the same personality types as me and my genetic line. We have some genetic traits that are unusual, and that even makes it harder to understand. And then I said, well, if I went to school, so I basically graduated college functionally illiterate. And it's funny that I own a newspaper, so we joke about that. We have a lot of inside jokes. At 17, I was interviewed by a psychologist because we were trying to prove that I was slow so that I could get a program like one of the first ones that was made by Kurzweil that would read things out loud so I could absorb data because I was functionally illiterate. And always wanted to absorb data. And the guy who did the psychological evaluation tested my IQ, and he said, "Okay, here's the deal. You're illiterate." And I'm like, "Tell me something I don't know." Right? I was 17, and he said, "But your verbal IQ is super high." And he said, "Typically, you those three things, your spelling, your reading, and your verbal IQ, are exactly on par with each other. And it's not normal that they would be separated." And so I tested too high to get any help. Because I had like a 114 IQ, which is about average, used to be average for getting into college. And he said, "Yeah, and it looks like if you if you knew how to do those reading and writing and spelling, you would probably be somewhere in the 135 to 145 range. We just can't know. And I was really good on math, even though I couldn't read a math book. And the reason why later I found out, my brother is like me. I have a twin brother, and he would always look into things. And he looked into vision therapy once, and he's like, "Oh, this is the solution, vision therapy." And what it is all my life since I was a child, I have perfect vision, except for in very, very, very narrow areas. And that narrow areas would be print. And so I'd read a book and things are fuzzy, things are moving, things are in and out of focus. And what that does, if you're doing video, you kind of know what it's like when you render a video. Just it shuts down your computer. There's so much processing. Well, your visual system works in real time harmoniously. So when your eyes are perfectly aligned on the same spot, you get 3D vision instantly. And it's a very low energy, seamless rendering. When you have one eye that is a little off, the more it's off, the more the brain needs to render those together, and the more computing. So I could read for about 5 minutes before I felt like I'd run sprinted miles. I was like in seventh grade, and I was like, I would rather load myself up with weights and run up a mountain than read for like 10 minutes. I could only get 3 or 4 pages at a time. And even then, it was hard because everything's fuzzy, everything's moving. And my brother went in the debt to try and do vision therapy, and it solved his issue. And I think he was in his late 20s or early 30s when that happened. And I've never really had access to capital, so I'm like, well, that's not really a solution. I didn't want to go into credit card debt. And then when I had my daughter, and she had strabismus, which is a much larger misalignment of vision. And when it's narrow, it's easy to go undiagnosed, and you'll have probably somewhere between 5 to 20% of students actually still have this today. And it's unfortunate. I've tried with policymakers to talk to them, and it would absolutely drastically increase reading rates if they just did vision therapy exercises for people who have a hard time reading. My daughter had strabismus, and so her vision was off. And for most of her early life, she didn't even have, she was afraid to go downstairs because when I walk downstairs, I have a little bit of blurry peripheral vision that sees my foot. And if I can see my foot, then I know I can step pretty close to a cliff and I don't have any concerns. But if I had the peripheral vision she had at that time, I wouldn't be able to see my feet. And it would be super scary to go downstairs unless you're looking at your feet. Because and in their area, so what that does is it's the further away, the more rendering it does. And eventually it gives you headaches, and there could be something where your brain will turn one eye way out and then turn it off. You'll sometimes see people who have a dead eye, but for no reason. And that could always be that their brain just turned it off because it was for its own survival. That could be a possibility. The other thing is that so I took my daughter. I went into like $5,000 or $10,000 of credit card debt because there was no way I wanted my daughter to go through. I was afraid she'd be illiterate and highly intelligent with no reason to be illiterate. She was, gosh, like 6, 7, 8, 9. And through those years, I would do the exercises with her because how else are you going to get a kid to sit down and do these like finger movements, or you look at a paper on the wall and you walk in a circle around 2 bar stools? It doesn't seem fun. It's really boring. But what happened within a year, she developed peripheral vision. So you reignite your peripheral vision and harmonize it first, and then you start with your central vision later. And now she can walk downstairs. She has no problem riding a bike down a hill like that. Even the slightest grade downhill for a child like that is super scary because they don't know what's going on.
What did
And
you call it? Is there a name for this?
well, she had strabismus, which is just misaligned eyes.
Oh.
Um, but vision therapy was the solution. It's a bunch of exercises. And
Wow.
then there's a process, and she did have the surgery too that supposed to realign your eyes. But the thing is that the problem is in the brain and the connection.
Mm,
It's not in the mechanical eye. Her eyes are perfect, and so that was the wrong decision to have surgery. And it's and if you do the surgery, what it does is it mechanically aligns your eyes much closer. But if you haven't done some of the exercises and your brain has never been used to your eyes working harmoniously, it'll eventually turn one eye out again because it's easier to turn it off. Is the whole reason for the eyes turning out. That your brain wants to turn one eye off so the visual computation is doesn't constantly give you a headache and isn't
mm.
exhausting. Um,
Wow.
and so during that process, I just was uh, remember one time reading in my bed on my phone, tiny, tiny print. And I was like, wait a minute, I've been reading for like 35 minutes on my cell phone with like size 3 font or something. I don't know what cell phone is, really small. And and what happened is and I thought, oh, I've actually done this half a dozen times in the last several weeks. Oh, I can read now. And so through that process with my daughter and getting her as far as we could with her vision, um, it solved my ability to read. And now I still have all the, again, one of the things about culture is I look at the education system as more of a cultural system and about standards and about order. And when I learned how to read and spell, when my eyes would be fuzzy or misaligned or the words would move, well, I could never make sense of even sometimes the alphabet. And And so now when I spell, I have four ways to spell every word because one, they didn't have Grammarly or anything, and you can't interrupt a class of people who are 3 or 4 years ahead of you on spelling and reading. You just you understand, you gotta just be quiet. And so I inputted everything wrong. And since I had that pivotal part of my life where all the inputs were wrong, always, and the expert the ex and the when I would spell, it's too costly in an industrialized education system to solve that problem. So I just learned that I cost too much.
Oh,
And the problem was that it can't I could solve it, but man, it would take me going back and re going back to third grade, right? And even then, you still have that neurological train track. You still have that you can spell things two different ways, which in real life you can't. You can't spell things two or three different ways. So even now, even I know even if I know how to spell a word, I'll spell it wrong, and I'll look at it. I'm like, it's I've been doing it for 30 years, 40
mm,
years, 40 years. I can't catch it either. I can't really catch it. So I have to offload those tasks, which is
yeah.
which is good now with I mean you have AI, you can just
Oh my gosh.
write something out and drop it in and it'll catch everything so quickly.
Yeah.
And
But look how you've compensated. Oh my goodness. My sister's a teacher and it's just amazing when kids have these kind of things and like you said, I'm not going to interrupt the class, so you keep going and you compensate. You find a way to
right,
compensate and
you have
you're
to.
a realtor, you're running a newspaper. Oh my
Mm,
gosh, that's just amazing.
yeah, that was just an outgrowth of if I had grown up in a way where I was literate, I would have been super intelligent. Interesting thing is that when I was younger, we ended up having a lot of parties, and I didn't understand what. First of all, I didn't understand I was statistically intelligent, and then I started realizing that it's hard to have sometimes just normal conversations when you're younger because first of all, you don't really have anything complex or academic to talk about. You're kids. I don't have anything complex I could read about to satiate that because I can't read. And what that meant is I think we turned to alcoholism and alcoholism or having parties and other things because, well, then everything's relatable, lowest common denominator. And yeah, it was interesting to learn that. And people don't like hearing this, but I always, as I got older, started understanding capital formation in multiple ways. I always tell people, oh, I'm my definition of white trash is just somebody that has no real access to capital, whether it be community, cultural, or commercial, because you don't really have options.
Yeah.
If you don't, if you never exposed to other things, then that's what you have. If you live on a junkyard and you're going to be a mechanic, you're going to be a junkyard mechanic. You're
Hmm.
not going to have these great, it was a process, and I definitely have been trying to do what I can for my daughter, but I'm not sure it really worked out. But I do have the trust. I do have the trust, and worked out meaning like I never got her in private school. I never got her like maybe an education system that could challenge her, but I do have the trust.
Yeah, that's so important. And again, it always comes back to those core values. We're almost out of time here, Corey. We've learned so much and you've talked about so many things that are important and so valuable to community. Two things. One is how do we find the Mill Creek Mill Creek View?
Millcreek.us. And
Millcreek.us. He's showing us the paper, but this is a podcast. But
yeah,
I submitted an article, so I don't know if
right.
it's run yet.
And you could always just Google Millcreek View
Okay.
and small community paper, and that's what it's about. And we're going to grow distribution. We may go slightly outside of those areas, and again, the point of maintaining something like the Millcreek View is so that you have a functional culture and community, like you were talking about. It's super important that if you can't get to your kids in time, that they're in an environment where you trust their safety. As things get globalized and digital, those personal connections start falling apart. And the more we get in touch with our phones, that's our connection to the outlet world. And we're not talking about flesh and blood connections, the less community trust we're going to have.
Well, so I think you just answered this, but my final question for you is, Corey, what is it that you really, really want us to know?
Even though we're in a hyper polarized time period, I believe that there's a lot of commercial reasons for that and a lot of power based reasons for that. We can look to just how humans have gotten along forever. And there are actually some of these things that we see now as polarizing issues. The differences were important to be part of an one thing I didn't get to you is there's a big difference between emotional truth and operational truth. And there's always one emotional truth that's correct, but there's many to choose from. And then there's one operational truth at the end of the day, and it's a process. And I look at it as a left to a right process. Those two sides have been polarized, whereas in normal functioning society, they're harmonized. And it's supposed to be a process of harmonizing things, and that there is a solution to harmonize things, but it does require education and conversations, and it certainly requires a very, very close-knit communities and in a strong cultural understanding.
Well, Corey, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Laurie. I appreciate the time.
If you love this podcast, here's a big ask. Will you share with your friends and family, subscribe, give us a review, and a 5-star rating so that others looking to reinvent their lives will be able to get the help they're looking for? Thank you in advance.